Hello everybody, I'm Bill Brown. This DVD is a short introduction to the work of Dr. Annette Childs. Now, Dr. Childs is a woman who spent the better half of 20 years researching information on after-death communications. That's right, communications from those who have died. Now, I know most of us have been exposed to this sort of notion through many television shows that entertain us and they dazzle us with the concept of messages from the dead. But let's face it, those shows are really there to entertain us, not to really take us deeper towards the truth. Now, I've known Dr. Childs for many years, and I've witnessed her adherence to science and academia as she teaches people from all over the world about after-death communications. Over the past few years, I've also begun to hear Dr. Childs admit her own ability to discern messages from those who have died. Now, she's guarded about talking about this. It can sometimes run counter to the norms expected of one who makes their living as a credentialed psychotherapist, and credentialed she is. She earned 3 college degrees, including a PhD by the time she was 30, spent the bulk of her 20-year career at the bedside of the dying. She's the author of 3 multi-award-winning books. She's a diplomat from the American Psychotherapy Association, and if all that weren't enough, she's also a fellow in Thantology, Grief, and Bereavement. Annette Childs is not lacking in credibility, yet the message that she shares is nothing less than incredible. Now, as a veteran broadcast journalist of more than 40 years, I've seen a lot. I think Dr. Childs is someone who really does have a message for all of us. As she likes to say, her teachings just don't change the way you deal with grief and loss. They actually change the way you live your life. I couldn't agree more. But take a look for yourself at a few of the topics that we tackled in a recent interview. You always talk about something called non-local consciousness. What is that?
Well, it's a fancy word that actually is very simply telling us that the brain and the mind are 2 very different things. That's a scientific concept that it's really at the heart of everything that I do. It has everything to do with both life, death, and the afterlife, after-death communications. The brain is a little 3-pound organ. We all have one. It sits in our skull. It's full of neurons and electrical activity, but it's like a transistor radio. The mind is something that exists around the brain, and science is coming to the understanding that the brain and the mind are not the same thing.
Exactly what is after-death communication?
An after-death communication is a subjective sense of having been in communication with a deceased loved one.
Tell me your thoughts on mediumship and grieving.
Many grieving people today will go to mediums for messages, and a lot of that, I think, comes from what they see in the media. There's a lot of television shows, there's a lot of afterlife type television, radio, talk show, you name it. I think most people know at this point what a medium is. So the grieving are seeking out those experiences which are beneficial, but a simple after-death communication is just a little tiny stepping stone.
You call what you do clinical mediumship, and you strive to use these after-death communications in a way that promotes the growth process for your clients. Can you explain this?
I make my mind like a dartboard, and I ask their deceased loved ones, send me a piece of information, and hopefully it's a bullseye. And sometimes it is an absolute bullseye. Sometimes it's on the outer edge of the dartboard. A lot of times the grieving want more than that message. Are they okay? What else do they have? Where are they? And I will try and help the grieving to understand, if I were to give you a sense of where they're at, that locks you into time and space with that. I worked with a family a while back, and they had been told by a medium that their teenage daughter was on her cell phone and very happy using her cell phone on the other side, and of course that made terrific sense to them. What teenager doesn't use a cell phone, though? The skeptic in me I struggle with things like that because I don't think you could miss by saying a teenager is using a cell phone. But like I said, the grieving, they have to have something. So the family was left with this sense of this teenager laying on her bed on the other side using her cell phone and happy as a clam. And I'm sure they left that mediumship reading, and that was a good thing because they felt connected. And there were other things that were told to her that were credible. So I'm not at all saying this wasn't a credible medium, but they left with this corporeal, tangible sense of their daughter on the other side, and it included a bedroom, a bed, and a cell phone. 3 months later, if I check in with that family, you know what their sense of their daughter's going to be? Bedroom, bed, cell phone. Because they don't have the ability to move out of that. So they will go back to a medium. That medium or another medium. Where is she now? What's she doing? Which can become a whole other issue. So building an interior sense of presence and a sense of place through education, through understanding non-local consciousness, quantum field theory, that's where it can become very helpful. Because I have no idea what the other side looks like. I have no idea what they're doing. I get darts of information. I know their personality goes on because I couldn't know that novel piece of information if they didn't send it to me. That's the drop into the still pond that we need to build from. It's work and it takes time, but it's worth the effort.
There's a clear line, I think, between what you do and between what other people do. Talk about that.
It's been really difficult for me as a professional and a clinician to become more open about this, in part because of how it can be perceived. I cherish my academic training. I love the fact that I am bound by a profession that I have ethics, I have constructs that I follow, I have research-based treatments that I use with people. That's like a blanket that I wrap around myself, and it makes me feel very secure in the work that I do. If you were to begin to seek out your loved one and continue just to seek out your loved one would become your God. And that is something universally we know we are not to seek. That would be called a false idol. I don't go towards religious verbiage, but you get the nature of what I'm talking about. So an after-death communication, if I had a still pond in front of me, that's like a drop of water that falls into a still pond. I want people to start chasing the ripples. I know the drops are amazing, but don't get caught watching those drops, because you will get hypnotized by the drops and you'll go nowhere. You won't grow, your life won't expand, and you won't move through your grief. Follow the ripples, move out from that experience, and it's beautiful what starts to happen. They do start to find their loved one, but it isn't a single pointed search for their dead loved one. They begin to understand energy. They begin to see meaning in other things. They begin to expand their sense of presence out in the world. It becomes something, it doesn't just help them find their deceased loved ones, it changes the way that they live their life.
Do you really believe, I mean, deep down inside, do you believe that someone from the other side is communicating with you, whether it's this person or that person? You really, really buy into this?
The short answer to that question is yes. I absolutely do, because of the preponderance of communications that have come through that I cannot explain in another way. But then there is the part of me that has followed those ripples out. And it gets quickly, that sense of the personal turns into the universal. And I'm very much a believer in quantum field theories. And I do believe there is a field that resonates, that contains everything. And at a very esoteric level, we're all one. And yes, it is your loved one, but it's everyone else's loved one as well. And when one of us heals, we all heal. And when one of us breaks, when I work with a mother who's lost her child, I too have lost my child. And they're, even saying that to you, there is such a universal sense inside of me that I just get to touch the truth every once in a while. If it's helpful to call it Margaret Borwatt, and I think it is Margaret Borwatt, but it's so much bigger than Margaret Borwatt. And when I'm working with Bob and he's looking for Jane, it is Jane, but it's so much more than Jane. And that's a place I hope to help other people expand to, because that's the light that will carry us through these lives that we have, which are not easy.